What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with a 2022 NFL mock draft. We are basically doing this post Senior Bowl. The Senior Bowl was this weekend on Saturday, and some things have changed, some things haven't changed. What hasn't changed around here is that we're not actually NFL draft scouts, so we're kind of just going to give you like a casual NFL mock draft based on our opinions, what we'd like to see happen, some fantasy implications, of course, of some things that might happen in this mock draft as well. So if you guys enjoy the video at any point, like, comment, subscribe. Danny, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And yeah, it's just kind of fun looking forward. Again, we're by no means a Dane Brugler type of person out here. We're not going to go through like every team specific need, every team specific scheme and pair a player there. No, we're just kind of going to give you a brief overview, maybe contextualize it as to how it could impact fantasy if things were to happen the way we have them laid out. And honestly, just give you a breath of fresh air from, the hardcore fantasy content we've been providing all offseason. So yeah, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get into this 32 team one round type of mock. It's exciting.
Yep, for sure. So without further ado, let's hit the intro. Okay, so one round mock draft. We're not going to do any trades in this one. I'm sure we could do trades. We'll probably do another mock draft around the combine time, and then at that point, maybe we'll introduce some trades. But to be honest, I'm not very familiar with this draft class. I'm sure you'd like to be a little bit more familiar with it as well. So in terms of players who are considered best player available and who's worthy of trading up for at certain points in time, as well as the quarterback position usually drives a lot of the trading to begin with anyway. And to me, it's just a complete mystery of how teams value quarterbacks. I would say coming out of the Senior Bowl, Malik Willis probably did a lot to help himself. I'm not really sure what the status is on Matt Corral, who wasn't at the Senior Bowl because of an injury that he suffered in their bowl game. So a lot to kind of work through still at this point in the offseason. So for at this time being, we're not going to do any trades. Probably will in the next time we do a mock draft.
For sure. And again, we're kind of just giving an overview. Again, we haven't fully dove into a lot of these players yet. But again, like I've watched a lot of college football. I've watched a lot of analysis of people that are smarter than me breaking some players down. So to the best of my ability, I will try to contextualize a lot of these picks. And speaking of the first pick on the board right now, I mean, if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars and you have Trevor Lawrence as your locked in franchise quarterback, you ended up signing Doug Peterson to be your head coach, hopefully in innovating that offensive system. Getting a blindside protector like Evan Neal, a 6'7", 340-pound type of beast, especially with Cam Robinson set to hit the free agency market, I think it has to be the pick. I mean, we kind of saw what happened last year in terms of Trevor Lawrence's development ending up being stymied, and just having a guy like Neal with the amount of upside, the amount of potential athletically and physically that he has, I think he's got to be the no-brainer here at one.
Yeah, as much as you want to take, potentially the best player available and take a edge rusher or something like that, you've invested a lot in that position in recent drafts with Josh Allen, Kayvon Thibodeaux, guys like that. And your number one goal this offseason has to be making sure that you're not the franchise that screwed up Trevor Lawrence. Like you need to be, surrounding him with talent, whether it's skill positions, offensive line help, coaching staff, all that stuff needs to be the primary focus of the Jacksonville Jaguars. If you have an offensive tackle prospect that's worthy of going number one overall, your left tackle's hitting free agency after playing on the franchise tag and to be honest, just isn't very good. Go with Evan Neal. I know it's going back to the Alabama well, but he's a much better player than what Cam Robinson represents.
Yep. No, I for sure. I agree with you there. Now we're on the clock with Dan Campbell's Lions, and they actually this is the first of their 2 first-round picks, obviously owning the Rams first-round pick as well, I believe. Cut that.
Yeah, it's the Rams. So it'll be 31 or 32, depending on if they win the Super Bowl. In the
Correct.
Matthew Stafford trade, they got their first rounder this year, and then
Correct.
they got their first rounder next year as well.
Yeah, it is the Rams. I almost mixed it up with the Dolphins. But either way, you're picking second overall here, and you're basically facing one of 2 picks that you could potentially take, in my opinion. And it's going to be one of the top edge rushers on your board. Obviously, outside of Trey Flowers, they don't really have much going on in terms of being able to generate a pass rush. And for me, I think the pick here, homebred in Michigan, he's been living it up, been bulking up over at the University of Michigan with the Wolverines. And I just think Hutchinson kind of brings that edge, kind of brings that motor that Dan Campbell is really looking for to really give his defense an identity. I mean, we saw Hutchinson this year, a super refined player, big, powerful hands, athletic for his size. I mean, he is an all-around stud type of player to be able to take this pick. Now, does he have the, bend upside of a Kbon Thibodeaux? No, I don't think he has that type of, supreme bend, Von Miller type of dip. But I mean, you're talking about a guy that can just overpower offensive tackles, drive them into the quarterback's lap. I think Hutchinson is your classic, I don't want to say a Bosa bro type of mold, but from a technical, physical standpoint, he's not going to win more so with a dip. He's going to win more so with his power. So getting him here at second overall really adds an identity, adds a tone to that defense that Dan Campbell wants to set.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously, the quarterback position is going to get some buzz, especially coming out of the Senior Bowl, where Malik Willis was pretty much the guy that everybody talked about. I'm seeing Lions Twitter talking about if you like Malik Willis, you should take him at 2. You shouldn't, try and trade up with your second first-round pick and go up and get him at that point. If you love the quarterback, take the quarterback. But in my opinion, I haven't watched Malik Willis up close, but from the people I trust, I don't think there's a quarterback in this class worthy of going second overall. So I think it's probably a mistake to rush the rebuild, take the best player available, whether it's Hutchinson, Thibodeaux, Hamilton, whoever you like. The best at number 2, Hutchinson to me fills a need as well. So go ahead and take Hutchinson there. Number 3, the Houston Texans also could use an edge rusher. It's definitely another good one on the board. They could go with, Kyle Hamilton, who's by all accounts might be the best prospect in this entire class, regardless of position. But do you want to take a safety at number 3? What are you thinking with this pick?
I think the main two in the conversation right now would be between Hamilton and Thibodeaux. Obviously, with Hamilton, you're getting your, Derwin James like eraser on the back end. Again, this will sound very corny, but he's not your typical safety. He's not your typical, stick him in too high, let him play pure coverage. I mean, this is a guy that can play all across the board, all types of defense for you. Could be a nickel linebacker, could be a single high. He has that type of functional athleticism. However, another top edge prospect I see here would be Kbon Thibodeaux. And if we're comparing elite prospect to elite prospect, taking the one at a bigger position of value at edge, I think would probably be the optimal play for the Texans. So I would go Thibodeaux. Again, you do have Grenard there as a decent building piece on that defensive line rotation. Getting a guy that can kind of delegate Grenard into that really good type of number 2 status and be your main guy with Thibodeaux would ultimately be the pick here for me. Again, Thibodeaux, as I kind of mentioned, he's twitched up. We saw basically a different parallel from what Hutchinson is in full effort, full mobility, for full punch power type of situation that we get with Hutchinson. With Thibodeaux, again, you're getting that more natural bend. You're getting that more functional athleticism, that length that Thibodeaux has. And I do think if both players were to hit their ceilings, that Thibodeaux would probably end up being the better player than Hutchinson. I just think that both of them deserve to be top 3 picks in this scenario. So again, falling here, Texans, you're not complaining with Thibodeaux.
Yep, for sure. Now, moving on to the New York Jets. Again, a number of needs. You could go, offensive line. You could go on the defense somewhere. I know Saleh, as a defensive head coach, probably wants to add some talent to that defense. They do have Marcus May playing on the franchise tag this year. I believe he got injured too on the franchise tag. We don't exactly know if he's going to be back, if he's going to hit the market. Whatever the case is, if they want to, they could slide Kyle Hamilton in to replace Marcus May, or they could re-sign Marcus May and have like one of the better safety tandems in the league. They could go with a guy like Derek Stingley, who, going back to his freshman season with Joe Burrow, was the talk of the town. He was, this is going to be a future top 5, top 10 overall pick corner. What are the directions that the Jets probably go here?
Yeah, I do think that this will come down. Again, you're going to hear this a lot with Hamilton. Talent-wise, he should be a top 5 type of pick. But if you're the Jets and you're looking at your board right now and you're looking at a guy like Derek Stingley, you saw what he was able to do as a freshman. Obviously, these past couple of years, he's been banged up, hasn't really been at that level of play. But for a guy that was 19 years old, winning the way he did on that LSU team that, as we all know, ended up dominating college football that year. I mean, this was a true freshman, 18, 19-year-old that was locking down the best receivers in the country. So if you're taking a stab at a highly valued position like corner, I think betting on a guy with the athleticism and the talent that Stingley has would be a worthwhile bet to make at number 4. Now, could he make it to 10 in this hypothetical scenario? Yeah, maybe the injuries and the inconsistent play across these last 2 years bring him down, but I don't see a way that the Jets can afford passing on a guy with this level of talent. So I would go with Stingley here. Again, it's very close between him and Hamilton, but when you're faced with 2 extremely talented prospects, taking the one with the higher positional value would end up being the play. So Stingley here, number 4 overall. Number 5, it's pretty simple to me. If you're the Giants, Obviously, you're bringing a new regime with Brian Dable coming over to this team. Uh, Giving Daniel Jones another stalwart tackle to pair with Andrew Thomas would be the optimal play. Again, Matthew Pert was a third-round pick, had some upside, but I mean, he's not really going to keep you from taking a top 5 level tackle. And obviously, as we know, Nate Solder on his contract is just complete liability, not a guy you really want out there on his own. So getting a guy, in my opinion, with the level of upside that Akeem Ekwonu presents for the Giants would be the play here. Again, with Ekwonu, maybe he doesn't have the technical refinement of a Charles Cross, but when you watch this guy on tape, I mean, it's kind of similar to what Mekhi Becton represented a couple years ago. I mean, this is just a guy that if he sees you in front of him, he's going to put you on your back. I mean, and having that level of aggression, that level of tenacity on your offensive line to kind of give them, a really good physical identity is ultimately going to be the play here for the Giants at 5. Now, is he going to be the most technically refined? Is he going to step in day one and be, a complete non-liability? No, I think he still has to work through some things. But if you're going to be taking a tackle here at 5, you want to make sure that they have the upside, the strength, the fluidity to end up being ultimately one of the top 5 to 10 at the position. And if Akeem Ekwonu hits his ceiling, he can absolutely be in that top 5, top 10 type of tackle range, which would make this pick well worth it here at 5.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I don't know if you're going to be taking this guy to be your right tackle or if he's going to be your left tackle. You move Andrew Thomas or whatever the case is. Like both tackle positions are very valuable in the NFL because the left tackle, right tackle thing was like a 20 years ago thing. Like they don't play the same anymore. They line up the best edge rushers around your right tackle, honestly, more often than they do around your left tackle. The only, advantage you have for a left tackle is the blindside factor of it. So I think you probably just go with the best available player here for, your team's needs. Obviously, if there's an offensive tackle worthy of a top 5 pick, your primary goal, whether it's Daniel Jones or whoever, is that you build a good offensive line because your offensive line has been bad for years. Coming into the season, I ranked it as the worst offensive line in the league, despite you guys having a top 4 overall pick left tackle in Andrew Thomas from a couple of years ago. So adding an offensive tackle to give you some bookends for the long term, whether it's Daniel Jones, whether you draft a quarterback in 2023, whether you sign a quarterback in this offseason, I have no idea what they're going to do at quarterback, but whatever you guys do, the New York Giants, you need to have some bookend offensive tackles to help that quarterback out.
For sure. And Ekwonu's no different here. So we're looking at number 6 overall. And speaking of offensive tackle, I mean, there's no real quarterback that, unless you're obviously the Panthers and, Malik Willis or somebody stands out to you, that I would force a pick here at 6. However, there is one of the elite tackles that is falling to you. And if you're the Panthers and you can't get, an elite level quarterback prospect in your eyes here, take your best tackle prospect. And for me, that would be Charles Cross. Kind of echoing what I said with Akeem Ekwonu. While Akeem Ekwonu may not be the most, technically refined tackle right away, Charles Cross is kind of the opposite. Charles Cross is a guy that has a lot of technical refinement, is good with his hands, is good with his feet. He just doesn't necessarily have that overwhelming power, that overwhelming strength that an Ekwonu or a Neal has. However, if you're the Carolina Panthers, you just need a guy that can be steady on that offensive line. Maybe Charles Cross will never be a top 5 type of left tackle, but if he has a similar career development to what we've seen with Andrew Thomas, I don't think you're complaining at that point.
Right. And I think we've heard that about other offensive tackle prospects in the past too. Like that's what they said about Ryan Ramczyk coming out of Wisconsin. And Ryan Ramczyk obviously has achieved his ceiling and has turned into one of the better tackle prospects in the league when, the draft is never a slam dunk for any player. If you got a player that can just play, maybe he doesn't have the biggest athletic ceiling in the world, but if he can just play tackle, that's all you need him to do to begin with. So that definitely sure. And I said that I had the Giants ranked 32nd. I had the Panthers ranked 31 coming into the year in this offensive line, landscape. So they need some offensive line help severely for whoever their quarterback ends up being. By all accounts, it sounds like they're going to be aggressive at going after a quarterback, whether that's Watson, Russ, whoever is available. Maybe they pull the trigger on a Malik Willis if they can't get a veteran quarterback because, as the process goes along, we know, from following the draft for a number of years that these quarterbacks tend to gain steam throughout the process, Senior Bowl, Combine, pro days, etc. So maybe by this time, in April, Malik Willis is, the 6th overall pick and nobody bats an eye. But at this point in time, I just don't think he's going to go that high.
It's funny because it's kind of similar to, what was it, the 2013 draft where the only first-round quarterback we saw from was EJ Manuel. But Aside from that 2013 draft, we've kind of seen it everywhere to the point where a quarterback automatically or assumingly game steam across the entire offseason. Now, could this be a 2013 year? We see one in the first round. Sure. But I genuinely think that when it's all said and done, we could see closer to 3 or 4 go in the first rather than the 1 or 2 that we expect in this current landscape. So yeah, could one blow them away here? Sure. But at this current juncture, I don't feel comfortable going with a Malik Willis over a guy that I know could be a steady contributor day one with Charles Cross. So I do agree and echo what you say there. Speaking of picks and speaking of next pick on the board, I mean, if you're the New York Giants here, obviously bringing in Brian Dable, as I said earlier, a drafting trend I kind of noticed with Buffalo in these past couple years is getting these versatile defensive linemen that maybe they're not the most elite in terms of functional athleticism, but can do a number of impact in terms of your defensive line rotation. We saw it with AJ Epineza 2 years ago. We saw it with Greg Rousseau this year. We saw it with Boogie Basham in the second round. So if we're looking at that type of mold, getting a prospect that is better than all 3 of those guys at this pick in George Karlaftis would be the way I see the Giants leaning here. Again, you do have obviously a decent interior defensive line rotation. Obviously on the edge, you have Lorenzo Carter and Azeez Ojulari, but getting a guy that can play 3-tech, that can play as your base defensive end, that has versatility to play all over your front with a George Karlaftis would ultimately be where I would decide to go here if I was the New York Giants. And talking about the prospect himself, again, he's kind of similar to a Aiden Hutchinson. Maybe he's not quite the athlete of a Hutchinson, but is a guy who's super smart on the outside, who's super refined with his hands, and who is just flat out dominant once he's able to get that punch working. And getting that here at 7 overall, I think is a value here if you're the New York Giants. So getting Karlaftis, I know he's lower on the TDM board for some reason, but I do think he is the next best edge rusher available.
Yep, for sure. I don't disagree. Moving on to the Atlanta Falcons.
Um,
Again, Kyle Hamilton still on the
yeah,
board. He's a
yeah.
safety, which is probably going to happen in the real NFL draft. Like I know Kyle Hamilton, pound for pound, might be the best prospect in this draft, but he plays safety. It's an undervalued position. The Atlanta Falcons just need playmakers on their defense in general. They obviously hit on AJ Terrell, who's become a number 1 corner for them. They have some other guys on their defense, but you're just really missing impact players. And we've seen from the 2 teams that are in the Super Bowl right now, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald, Jesse Bates, like you need impact players on your defense. And there's no right way to build a defense in the NFL. We saw it from the Buccaneers last year. They built their defense through their linebackers and, through guys like Vita Vea and stuff like that, and Antoine Winfield on the back end. If you can just get playmaking pieces for your defense, they can really vastly help your defense in the long run. And Kyle Hamilton, maybe you want an edge rusher if you're the Atlanta Falcons, but Kyle Hamilton's a playmaker on your defense. So adding a guy like him to your defense will definitely go a long way to help that secondary out.
I'm glad you mentioned that because, again, I could talk about that from the personal view of my Dallas Cowboys. I mean, last year, the chatter all offseason was Cowboys need to draft the corner. Cowboys need to draft the corner. Cowboys need to draft the corner. When an elite talent falls to you at your draft pick, you take the elite player. And the Cowboys have done that the past 2 years, and that's how you end up with CeeDee Lamb and Micah Parsons as opposed to forcing picks at positions of need. Because at the end of the day here, you may have needs on your NFL roster, which you should definitely consider when you're drafting. But superstars are the ones that win championships. Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford are playing in the Super Bowl right now. You mentioned the playmakers that the Rams have on their defense, Jesse Bates. Like elite players in this league are what pushes you over the edge. And if a guy like Kyle Hamilton with his elite versatility on the back end falls to you at number 8, Atlanta, you're not forcing an edge rusher there. You're not forcing an IDL there. You're taking the best player there, and that would be Kyle Hamilton. So I fully agree with you there. We're back on the clock here with the Denver Broncos at 9. And where do you think we lean here?
Yeah, Denver, we talked about this kind of while we were, addressing how we were going to go about this mock draft. And Denver could add a quarterback, right? They could take a Malik Willis. They could take, Kenny Pickett, Matt Corral, whatever quarterback that they're going to value. But their team is set up to win right now. So I think they're more likely to go after a veteran quarterback, whether it is Aaron Rodgers, whether it is, a big name like Russell Wilson or Deshaun Watson, or they even just settle for like a Jimmy Garoppolo if they don't get those guys. I think they're likely to add a veteran quarterback regardless, whether it's a big name or a small name. So I don't think they're going to be after this quarterback class. And that makes me think that they're going to go probably to their next position of need with Von Miller leaving midway through, the season this year. They need an edge rusher opposite, Bradley Chubb. It aligns with what the better players on the board right now are. So I'll let you take it away with your Michigan boy here.
Yeah, I mean, David Ajabo, talk about complete upside on the edge there. You pair him up with Bradley Chubb. This is a guy who's a crazy athlete for the edge position. Yeah, is he a little bit raw? Yeah, he could work on some technical refinement, but getting a guy who in his third, fourth full year playing football this year automatically vaulted himself into the top 15 consideration. This is the type of talent you bet on at this portion of the draft. And getting a guy like Ojabo, again, if he had the technical refinement of an Aiden Hutchinson or a Kbon Thibodeaux, he would be the first overall pick.
Yep, for sure. So the number 10 pick, New York Jets back on the clock. I think not the worst case scenario happened for the Jets at 4, but I think ideally if you're the Jets, you want one of Thibodeaux or Hutchinson to fall to you. So you're hoping that the Texans or the Lions fall in love with one of these quarterbacks so that those guys can be pushed down to you. You settle for, Derek Stingley, who's a good prospect in his own right. Maybe you could have gone offensive tackle there to help out Zach Wilson, because much like the Jacksonville Jaguars at 1, your primary job is to make sure that Zach Wilson is a superstar quarterback. So because we didn't go offensive line at 4 here and we went with the corner there, we're probably going to go offensive line here to help Zach Wilson. And, you could go tackle, put a right tackle opposite Mekhi Becton. Again, Mekhi Becton sounds like he's got some, like, I don't know if it's attitude or like weight problems that he's got to work through. But at this point in time, he's shown enough talent that you probably don't want to just outright replace him with this pick. So your right tackle position, whether it's George Fant or you re-sign Morgan Moses, could be up in the air. Sounds like they like George Fant, so I think they actually might go interior here.
Yeah, and the thing with Kenyon Green, which would be the pick if I were making here at 10, the thing with Kenyon Green is he's played both tackle and guard in college, and he's done both at an extremely high level. Again, this is a tenacious blocker, super, super physical at the point of attack. And again, I mentioned the versatility and the functional athleticism he has for a guy his size. So getting him here at 10, again, this is a guy I've personally wanted the Cowboys to get at 24. So he's a very, very good player. And I think at 10, this is probably the proper evaluation for him. Take him here in that 10 to 15 range does seem appropriate, especially if you're a team like the Jets. You saw obviously Zach Wilson not have the most abundance of help this year. I feel like the number one priority this offseason should be in getting him another steady offensive lineman, maybe going in round 2 and getting a top-fledged receiver to pair with Corey Davis and Elijah Moore. So I think Kenyon Green in here, obviously with the depth in the receiver class, would be the optimal pick. So therefore, getting Kenyon Green, 10, locked and loaded.
Yeah, I don't think it's probably worth their time to draft a receiver at 10 overall. I'm sure there's, a couple of receivers in this class, so we wouldn't bat an eye if they went 10th overall. But, taking the offensive line help, because now suddenly you have, Becton, you have Elijah Vera Tucker, who you took in the first round last year. You have some veteran help on the interior as well, depending on what they do with some of those guys. And then if they re-sign Moses or use Fant at right tackle, suddenly you have an offensive line that's going to have some chemistry after working through some kinks in the first year, and also some talent now infused into it. And like I said, Zach Wilson's your future. You need to make sure that he is protected. He has some receiving help already, so receivers aren't quite as big of a need as offensive line might be. So let's go on to the Washington football team. We're out of the top 10, so we'll try and go a little bit faster than we've been going so far. At the quarterback position, again, Malik Willis sounds like he's rising up people's boards after his Senior Bowl performance. The Washington football team is kind of in like a rock and a hard place right now at the quarterback position, because they don't have a super high pick in a draft with a ton of quarterback talent. And they also don't have, the buzz around their team to the point that they want to go out and trade for an Aaron Rodgers or sign, whatever quarterback becomes available on the market. So Malik Willis does make a ton of sense to me as a quarterback that they'll like. They've, Ron Rivera and his staff have had experience working with mobile quarterbacks in the past. So I'm sure they'll know how to use a guy like Malik Willis.
Yeah, for sure. And everything we've heard from the Senior Bowl, as you kind of alluded to, is this is a guy that's been the best player there, the best quarterback there. I mean, every single account you see tweeting about the Senior Bowl has talked about the fact that the ball just comes out of his hand differently. And we've heard that from quarterbacks in the past in the Senior Bowl in recent years. And obviously, again, from a stature standpoint, he's not Josh Allen, but in terms of a raw needs refinement, has the natural athletic gifts, natural arm gifts that he has. Maybe this is the project that Ron Rivera could really help in terms of developing over these next couple years. So getting a guy like Malik Willis, again, athletic, big arm. You obviously have Terry McLaurin to help him on the outside. I mean, I do think that Washington could benefit from really getting a guy with this amount of upside, because at the end of the day here, outside of the Dallas Cowboys, what team in that division really has their quarterback position set?
Well, yeah, not only that too is that you have Heineke, and maybe you want to even re-sign Fitzpatrick to help bring Malik Willis along
The
slowly. Because I
bridge.
think worst case scenario, you start Heineke for like 10 games next year. I don't think any Washington fan will be too upset if they have Malik Willis waiting in the wings, starting to develop behind a guy like Heineke, because Heineke did fine. He's just not the future at the position. So,
Yep.
moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, couple
Yep.
needs. Obviously, they just hired a new coach. They don't have um, Mike Zimmer in the building anymore, but a Mike Zimmer classic is probably what we're going to be going with here.
Yeah, and I don't know why IDL is listed as their second need here, considering the fact that they've literally signed the highest profile interior defensive lineman over the last two free agency cycles with Michael Pierce and with Dalvin Tomlinson. To me, corner is the need here, and you get a guy like Sauce Gardner Senior at this 12th overall pick. Listen, I mean, this is a guy that has locked it down for that Cincy defense these past couple years. He's kind of similar in terms of what kind of a Trayvon Diggs would present in terms of having that size, having that length, having those ball skills, preferably being in a two safety type of system. I mean, Sauce Gardner has all the traits here to be that lockdown corner. And again, I'm speaking this from my own mouth, but I know Daniel Jeremiah as well is super, super high on this guy. I believe he had him going 6th overall in his recent mock draft. This is a guy with tons of talent. So getting him here at 12th overall, I think would be a home run if you're a Vikings fan.
Yep. And let's move on to Cleveland. We got
Yep.
a wide receiver need, I think, is
Yep.
probably the biggest need on this team. You have Jarvis Landry, you have, Donovan Peoples-Jones and Anthony Schwartz, guys that are, better suited to drop down a level on your depth chart, probably instead of going from your 1, 2, and 3, going to your 2, 3, and 4. And there's a number of wide receivers in this class that are worthy of this pick. And now I can finally speak on some prospects that I've watched. To me, Treylon Burks is the best wide receiver prospect that I've watched so far, and I haven't actually watched Drake London yet, so I don't know for sure if he's going to be better or not. But Garrett Wilson, to me, is the best fit for what Cleveland does. You run, kind of the zone running scheme, Kevin Stefanski, you run your offense through your run game, and you need a wide receiver that can separate quickly on short passing concepts and, get open on play action. To me, Garrett Wilson's the better fit for that system. And Garrett Wilson also kind of pseudo is like an Odell Beckham mold, right? He's the route runner type. He's not the, big physical athletic freak type. And we've seen Baker Mayfield succeed in the past with route runner types going back to his days in college and early on in his career as well. So I think if your number one focus needs to be Baker Mayfield's health coming into this offseason, because I think that's what they're going to do at the quarterback position. I know we've heard they're going to bring competition in and all that kind of stuff, but I highly doubt they're going to make a big splash at the position. They're probably going to play out Mayfield's 5th-year option and go from there. And I think getting him a receiver that can actually separate and get open and do some things after the catch is the primary focus of that team, and Garrett Wilson fills that need.
Yeah, and again, if it ends up not being Baker Mayfield, and say you traded Mayfield in a second and got Kirk Cousins, I mean,
I just don't think that's going to happen.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, even if like that were to happen, whoever plays quarterback is going to need a number one target. And I'm sorry, Jarvis Landry's a fine ancillary piece. Donovan Peoples-Jones could probably be a decent wide receiver 2-3 type. You need a number one alpha wide receiver with Odell Beckham's departure. So I do think this is a spot where we do see the first receiver come off the board with Garrett Wilson. So I absolutely love the pick. And as you kind of alluded to with your pro comp form, if you guys haven't seen the tail of the tape, make sure you go check that out. It's a guy that's in this division himself with Deontay Johnson. So getting your own Deontay Johnson, if you're Cleveland, would be a home run type of selection here.
Yep. With the Baltimore Ravens, I mean, again, I don't really know how good some of these prospects are at this point in the draft because I don't watch a whole lot of college football, but I know who Jordan Davis is, obviously, because they won the national championship this year. I know he's a big physical, Baltimore Ravens-esque type of player is the way I look at him. I know IDL is a big, selling point for the Ravens defense. They've always had good, fronts in the past, and they have a number of aging players like Calais Campbell who are no longer going to be there. Brandon Williams is a free agent. Sliding Jordan Davis into as their new nose tackle in that, Daron Payne type of mold like that you want for your defense kind of makes sense to me.
Yeah, and he's a very similar player. I don't think he has maybe the 3-down versatility of a Derek Brown, but in terms of what he brings to the run game is a Derek Brown type of mold, a big 6'6", 6'5", 350-pound type of player can basically log up that interior of your defense. I mean, you don't have to worry about teams running inside on you if you have a body like Jordan Davis that can really dominate any center in the game. And we've seen the impact of guys with that type of stature dominating the NFL before. I mean, heck, look at your Tampa Bay Buccaneers with what Vita Vea represents. Having a guy that can play the run the way a guy like Jordan Davis does, while it may not be as flashy and as valuable as, an absolute dominant edge rusher, is still a super, super valuable part of your defense. So I do like the pick. Jordan Davis, obviously the big selling point here is that Brandon Williams is a free agent. So getting a guy in Jordan Davis who can kind of just replace what you had with Brandon Williams and save you the money in terms of your financials, getting this guy cheap on the next 4 years will ultimately be a good pick for you. Going back here, Philadelphia's on the board, 15th overall. And again, they have 3 of the next 5 picks. So we'll kind of just talk about these needs in conjunction. But we're talking about off camera that, in our opinion, one of these picks needs to be a receiver. One of these picks needs to be either offensive line or defensive line. And the other pick needs to be best defensive player available. And we'll get the receiver out of the way first because obviously we have a more expertise in that range being a fantasy channel. And I'll let you talk about a guy you did a tail to tape on with Treylon Burks.
Yeah, Burks, kind of similar to what I said with Garrett Wilson. He's the better fit for what the Eagles, like to do. And Burks also kind of gives you something that your receiving core doesn't have, which is size. I mean, you have JJ Arcega-Whiteside, who all he is size because he sucks at everything else. But Treylon Burks, he gives you the after the catch ability. Obviously, it's his number one trait, in my opinion. And he also gives you explosive, big play ability to add to the outside to go along with a guy in Devontae Smith, who's more of your possession route runner type. And, whatever else you can muster up at the wide receiver position behind those two guys should be good enough to help out Jalen Hurts. And obviously he has Dallas Goedert at tight end to help out with some of that stuff as well. So Treylon Burks to me makes a lot of sense. I think they will go wide receiver with one of these 2 picks because New Orleans and the Chargers pick before them at 19, and they both could use wide receiver help on their team, especially. So I think Burks makes a lot of sense here.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you there. Looking now, though, we actually got them back to back. So we obviously, again, we take Burks here. We have a back-to-back pick here. And for me personally, again, it mentions that edge rusher is a big need for them. I know they're losing Derek Barnett. Obviously, with Brandon Graham aging as well, it is a concern there. I think a guy like Travon Walker, a guy that really stepped onto the scene, obviously, with that title-winning Georgia defense, and has ultimately proven throughout the year that he is one of the better edge rushing prospects in this cycle. I mean, to me, he has that inside-outside versatility that we've typically seen with the Eagles in terms of what they value. And having a guy with that type of motor is always going to be accepted on your defense. So getting Travon Walker here, 6'5", 275 pounds, again, has that versatility where if you want to slide him inside, you want to slide him on the outside, he can play really any position on that defensive front. So getting him here, obviously TDN values him at 15. We take him here at 16. So theoretically would be a value based on their board. I do think Walker is a good pick here.
Yep. I don't disagree. Moving on to the Los Angeles Chargers, obviously just fell short of the playoffs with Justin Herbert and the Raiders going to the bitter end of the NFL season. They have a number of needs they could address. Nothing really stands out too much to me, but they definitely could use some help in some areas. So where are we going there?
Yeah, and I think getting a locked and loaded cornerback too for the foreseeable future would be beneficial to them. Again, obviously you struck gold with what you ended up getting with Asante Samuel Jr. last year, but Michael Davis, an older, aging asset now. I believe he's about 27, 28.
He's still a good
really
player, though. I think he's a good cornerback 3.
He's not a bad cornerback 3. And obviously, again, your cornerback 2 this year was Chris Harris Jr. And he is, 34 now? 35?
He's pretty old. He was undrafted free agent in 2011.
Yeah, he's not a guy you typically want to hedge your future on. So getting a guy here, I mean, if we look at the board, next best player on the board would be Andrew Booth for me, which, I mean, you talk about athleticism out of the wazoo. This is what this guy ultimately represents. Is he going to be, that elite takeaway type of guy like, a Trayvon Diggs and Xavier Howard? No, but if you need a guy that can be absolutely superbly athletic, stay in phase, stick with some of the best receivers in the NFL, while ultimately Asante Samuel can be more of your on-ball type of player. I absolutely love the fit here, pairing him up with that type of corner with Asante Samuel, getting Andrew Booth here at 17.
Yep, don't disagree. Ring in the pick, Andrew Booth Jr. to the Los Angeles Chargers. We kind of talked about before this, the Saints could go probably two directions. I guess they could have gone corner as well, but with Booth off the board, maybe they don't go in that direction anymore. We don't know what they're going to do at quarterback. We have no idea if they're going to stick with a guy like Taysom Hill, even though Sean Payton, who's like his best friend, is no longer there. Do they go with Matt Corral here? Do they go, Kenny Pickett here? Do they go with any other, quarterback that they might like, Sam Howell or something like that? I think wide receiver probably presents the better value at this point in the draft. And assuming all the medicals are cleared, I think Jameson Williams probably is actually the first wide receiver off the board in the NFL draft. Obviously, he tore his ACL in the the semifinal of the college football playoffs, and obviously that was a big problem for the Alabama offense because they couldn't beat. I think that was actually was that the national championship that he tore his ACL in?
Yeah. So he would have tore his ACL in the national championship because Mechie tore it in the semifinal.
Yeah. So with Williams, he was on fast track probably to be the first wide receiver off the board before that happened. If they go to the combine and he's, rehabbing well and he's going to be ready for week one, I don't really see any way that he's not a top 20 overall player for NFL draft scouts, because we saw last year, even Caleb Farley was coming in with a lot of injury questions and he still went in the top 22 picks or whatever of the NFL draft. So I think Jameson Williams probably be a high pick, assuming the medicals are all right.
Fully agree here. 18th overall pick is value for him. Also, I actually do think that Mechie toured in the conference championship, and then JMO toured against Cincinnati. So maybe that would be true. Again, you guys could comment down below and let us know. We don't have that right in front of us either. But either way, I mean, we're talking about a 2-week discrepancy. Now we got the Eagles back on the board here, and I think a guy like Devin Lloyd or Nakobe Dean could really add, a tone to this defense. They kind of have that secondary lockdown with Maddox, Slay, McLeod. What's his name?
Anthony Harris.
Anthony Harris. Like you got a relatively decent secondary there. Adding a second level threat that Devin Lloyd is. I mean, you mentioned the physicality in the run game. You mentioned the overall motor that he brings. You mentioned his versatility in zone coverage, being a obviously lengthier linebacker at, I think he's about 6'4", 240. Getting that here on the second level defense to pair with a guy in Alex Singleton who showed to be a decent will linebacker this year. Getting him to fill that mic role for you. Ultimately here at 19, I mean, this is a guy that was getting top 10 to 15 type of buzz earlier this year. So I do think Devin Lloyd from a versatility standpoint is ultimately going to be the pick here.
Yep. And we get on to Pittsburgh. Again, I think this is a supply and demand type of quarterback draft. Like however many teams are in on these quarterbacks is going to determine how high they go. Now, are the Pittsburgh Steelers only in on Malik Willis? Because we know they like him based on everything that we've come out with. I tend to believe that this is the type of quarterback class that a couple teams are going to have their favorite. And if they don't get their favorite, then they'll go in a different direction. So maybe Malik Willis is their guy. And if Malik Willis is off the board, they don't pick a quarterback. But I mean, they have a Pittsburgh quarterback on the board right now. I know it's a lazy comp to say that they passed on a Pittsburgh quarterback in the past with Dan Marino, but just give him Kenny Pickett. I think it'd be a guy that they're going to be heavily, looking into, given that he's, right across the street from him or whatever. So Kenny Pickett to the Steelers. I think they're going to add a young quarterback. I don't know if it's going to be, a Jimmy Garoppolo type of addition. I think they're kind of embracing the like rebuilding mindset that they're in right now. I think they're more likely to add a young quarterback than any other quarterback needy team.
Yeah, and I'll quickly address it, then we can kind of speed this up. But with Kenny Pickett here, basically with the Malik Willis comparison, the Malik Willis parallel, you're kind of saying, oh, yeah, we have to face Lamar Jackson 2 times a year, so we'll get our own, big-armed, mobile type quarterback. With Kenny Pickett, I know it's super lazy, but he's kind of like that, Walmart, B-Tech kind of Joe Burrow as a prospect, where he's not going to have the strongest arm, but he's got some creativity outside the pocket. He can create out a structure. He's accurate down the field. And I mean, you talk about swag. We know how swaggy Joe Burrow is. Well, let's talk about the quarterback that just faked a slide in his bowl game.
Yeah.
But so we'll have Kenny Pickett here. Next up, we do have the New England Patriots. And with J.C. Jackson due for a big contract and losing Stephon Gilmore here, I do agree that cornerback will be a sneaky need if you are the New England Patriots. So overall, I mean, if we're looking at the cornerback board here, McDuffie and Mccreery obviously are in big consideration. Where are you leaning here, though?
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to re-sign J.C. Jackson because he obviously was very productive this year and he's going to cost a lot of money. I personally think that the Patriots have always been the type of team that's going to invest heavily in the secondary. But they also do like those kind of Nakobe Dean type of prospects as well. I'll leave it up to you. You can go whatever direction you want to go.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one. I don't mind giving them a Nakobe Dean here, adding versatility again to that linebacker core. I mean, when you're talking about Nakobe Dean, think of, I know I mentioned Walmart, Joe Burrow with Kenny Pickett. I don't necessarily think Nakobe Dean's Walmart anybody, but if you want to talk about kind of like a lower version of a guy that came out a couple years ago, I think Roquan Smith would be your comparison.
We're doing a lot of lazy, like school related
I mean,
comparisons.
but like in terms of stylistically, you got a 6'1", 220-pound linebacker that can match up on running backs, is very adept in coverage. I mean, I saw this guy firsthand against Michigan. I mean, anytime we were running to the outside, this guy was blowing it up. He's got sideline to sideline versatility. He's good in coverage. And he's just simply what New England looks for in terms of bringing an identity and speed to this defense, which is really what we've seen New England thrive off of in recent years. So Nakobe Dean, I think, would be a fine pick here at 21 for a team that really values that versatility like the New England Patriots do. But now we're back on the clock here and talk about New England Patriots. The Raiders ended up hiring former OC for the Patriots with Josh McDaniels as their next head coach. Where do you have them leaning here?
Man, they have a number of different directions they could go. They're kind of just like a mediocre team. So they have like pretty solid positional depth around like across the board, but not a lot of impact playmakers. So a best player available type of approach would probably make sense for them, whether it's offense or defense. I'll let you actually make the pick.
Yeah, I mean, if let me just check their secondary because I know obviously you got Hobbs and you got Casey Hayward was good this year, but I just kind of want to see what they got building there because again, like we're not full NFL insiders here. So they got Casey Hayward and Brandon Fasai. I don't even know how to say that. Is their cornerback too? So judging from that, I do think Roger Mccreery would be a good pick here. Again, if you're a Raiders fan, sorry for the full lack of development. We'll have this more accurate, more mocked out closer to the draft. But talk about Mccreery as the player himself. Again, he's not going to be the lengthiest corner. You're not going to stick him out on an island. He's not a 6'2", 220-pound type of guy. But talk about a guy that can stick with the receiver. Mccreery can do that. And we've seen it all Senior Bowl. He's really been dominant in those practices. So getting Mccreery here, I think, would be a good pick. Speaking of corner, I think you got to go corner here again if you're the not Carolina Panthers, Arizona Cardinals. I think McDuffie would be a good pick here. What are you thinking?
Yeah, that works just fine for me there. You can go on to your Cowboys after that.
Okay. So we go McDuffie. Let me just scan the board here. So IDL, there's not really anybody I would take here if I was Dallas. Jermaine Johnson would be in consideration. Just check OT. I mean, Penning's not bad. If Linderbaum falls to you at 24, you run up to the podium. So we take him here. Speaking of IOL, I do think Buffalo could benefit. Obviously, their biggest weakness on their offense would be that interior offensive line. So I think Zion Johnson is an absolute mammoth inside. I've heard a lot of Cowboys brass saying that if he was the best player on the board at 24, he'd be a good pick for us. So, I mean, at 25, that should be no different.
Yep. No kidding. The Tennessee Titans on the board. They have, again, another like situation like the Raiders. They're pretty decent at a lot of positions, but they're lacking a couple superstar pieces to put them over the top. In terms of like linebacker help, the big two, linebackers that I know of are off the board. Tight end, maybe there's a tight end worthy of going at 26 in this draft, but like Trey McBride obviously sounds like he had a great Senior Bowl practice. Maybe he's the first tight end off the board. But I do think they'd probably go on the defensive side of things with probably like a corner or something like that, or whatever else is best player available at that point.
Yeah, I mean, like again, I'll let you make the pick here. I'm fine with Johnson, Penning, or if you want to go secondary here.
Let's give them Penning actually, because the right tackle, obviously Isaiah Wilson didn't work out a couple of years ago. Their offensive line altogether just wasn't very good in that game against the Bengals, and with their offense finally getting healthy with Henry and AJ Brown and those guys coming back next year, they could always go wide receiver as well. But just securing that offense, making sure that Tannehill has everything around him that he needs is definitely something that I think they should probably go after. Wide receiver help will probably come in on day 2 for the Tennessee Titans because they don't necessarily need a number 1 or a 2 wide receiver.
Yep, no, I fully agree. And you talk about a Taylor Lewan type of player. Penning's got that, big size, big, ferocious demeanor of him. I mean, all Senior Bowl week, he's basically punishing guys after the whistle and shit. But I mean, that fits the identity of this Titans team. But either way, we got your Bucks on the board. Who are you guys leaning here?
Give me Matt Corral.
There you go.
I don't know if they're gonna like Matt Corral, but I like Matt Corral. So I'm gonna, assume the role of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers GM, Jason Light, and I'm gonna take Matt Corral because I really don't see what other quarterback options we're gonna have outside of taking a quarterback in the draft. Because it sounds like in a Pew Report, Scott Reynolds put out an article that we're not going to be in on Deshaun Watson. We're not going to be in on Russell Wilson, these big name quarterbacks. Your other options at that point are to go with Kyle Trask, who you drafted in the second round, who you overdrafted, sorry, in the second round last year, or to go with, a middling bridge type of Jimmy Garoppolo, Teddy Bridgewater type of quarterback. And to me, I'd just rather take the risk on a rookie like Matt Corral if he falls to 27 due to the injury and due to maybe missing some of the draft process. Because I do think had he been at the Senior Bowl and had he been, fully involved in that process, he'd be a buzzy name right now.
Yep, no, for sure. But either way, we are back on the clock here with the Packers. Good fit, obviously, with Tom Brady retiring for the Matt Corral to the Bucks. We're seeing edge as the big need here, and I kind of just looked at their spot rack situation, and it is pretty concerning that two of their top 5 highest paid players right now are Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. Zadarius being a $27.7 million cap hit this year, and Preston being 19.78. Now, if this team is losing Aaron Rodgers and is losing Devontae Adams, which really seems possible this year, I can see those two being cut candidates again. If you cut Zadarius Smith, you free up $15 million. And if you were to cut Preston Smith, you free up $13 million. So with that being said, I mean, you're looking at a guy that should realistically probably not even be here at Jermaine Johnson. You get cheaper, you get younger, you get a lot of talent here at the position. I think Jermaine Johnson would be a very smart, savvy pick for a Packers team that realistically can't afford to shell out $45 million to 2 aging edge rushers.
All right, so moving off of the Packers pick, let's get on to the Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins have, I would say, a couple needs. Running back's always a need for the Dolphins. They never seem to want to actually address it. They have Mike Mcdaniel coming in, who was hired, I believe, yesterday. He comes from the San Francisco 49ers system. We'll probably assume that he's going to run some kind of similar system to that. You already have Jalen Waddle, who you spent basically 2 first-round picks on last year. I think they could use another wide receiver. They have Mike Gesicki, who's a free agent. We don't know if he's going to be back. Devontae Parker re-signed in 2019 after his breakout season. And then behind those two like tertiary pieces, they really don't have a whole lot else. Tua showed a number of good signs this year, in my opinion. So if you want to get him another weapon, I think that would make a ton of sense to me, whether it's a running back, a wide receiver, or an offensive lineman as well. But we already took an offensive lineman, I believe, with the first pick that the Dolphins had earlier in the draft, right?
Yeah, this is actually their first pick on the board because obviously the other pick would have been conveyed to the Eagles. So they're back on the board here, and I mean, looking at the offensive line position, Falele is not a first round caliber type of player in my opinion. IOL, I mean, you're not going to really want to reach on a Ryan or a Kennard. So I do think a skill position weapon type of player could really help this offense and to evolve. And if it was me making this decision, I would personally go with Drake London because from what I've seen from the production, from the analytical standpoint, London is the most superior prospect left on the board. But again, we were kind of talking about this before we started recording that we do feel like NFL teams are going to value Jahan Dotson more than really any of the receivers on the board. Again, I personally would most likely prefer a London or a Bell, but I just don't really see a way that, given the buzz that we've heard from the NFL media, that Jahan Dotson escapes this first round. So again, you guys can comment down below, oh, they should have taken London, yada, yada. I fully agree on that standpoint, but I do think that Dotson would be the pick here if they were facing the situation.
Yeah, and I think the offensive line position actually has a pretty decent crop of free agents too. So if they do want to add, a Teron Armstead, Cam Robinson, Dwayne Brown, Trent Brown, Eric Fisher, like there's pretty decent tackles in free agency. They're probably going to have to pay up for them because they're tackles and they're, so a lot of those guys are pretty good players. But they have a very young offensive line as it is. It probably makes sense to add like a veteran, difference maker on that line as opposed to invest late first round draft capital on a guy that's probably not going to be a perfect prospect. Otherwise, he'd be going in the top 10 at that position. So, yeah, I think wide receiver is where the value lines up. Jahan Dotson, the NFL is going to love him. I can just tell. I know from, Mel Kiper and, Daniel Jeremiah types, they really like him. The NFL teams are going to like him. I personally would take Drake London as well, but I think that's the direction that the NFL would go. Although Drake London does kind of fit the Devontae Parker mold if they were to go for a similar type of receiver.
Yeah, no, I do fully agree. But hey, I mean, we saw in San Francisco that they kind of preferred that yards after catch style of player. Maybe in Miami with McDaniel there, maybe they want to add a speed element to this offense. Obviously, with already having Jalen Waddle, obviously we know that Jahan Dotson is a burner in his own right. So maybe you keep building on the strength of your offense with your speed and add a guy that, while isn't similar to Waddle, does have that speed 4-3-4-4 type of element to his game. So I do like the Dotson pick here. I do think it's a good fit. We're back here on the clock with the Kansas City Chiefs picking 30th overall, obviously losing in the AFC Championship game. And to me here, I do think that we kind of saw that this team in the second half of that game against the Bengals really got exposed from a secondary standpoint. Daniel Sorensen, whatever patchwork they're working at safety, aside from Tyrann Mathieu, really showed to be a liability, especially when you're going up against better passing attacks like the Cincinnati Bengals brought to the table. And I do think that adding a guy who's versatile like Daxton Hill, I saw him a lot at Michigan, could be a very, very good piece. Again, this is a great athlete, 4-4 type of runner, very good jumper, had versatility at Michigan playing both safety and nickel cornerback. I do think if you're the Chiefs, adding a chess piece that has versatility and athleticism, the way that Daxton Hill can really add to this defense will ultimately revitalize it. Because again, at the end of the day here, we could talk all we want about the Chiefs' offensive struggles in the second half of that game against the Bengals, but you have Mahomes, you have Kelsey, you have Tyreek Hill, you have a very much improved offensive line. I just don't really feel like you really need to add much on that end in terms of the offensive half of the game. So adding a guy like Daxton Hill who does improve your versatility and ultimately can get Daniel Sorensen off the field is going to be more beneficial for you in the long run. So I do like Daxton Hill.
Yeah, and Tyrann Mathieu also free agent after this year
Yep.
too, so that makes a lot of sense as well. If they were to add a wide receiver, I feel like they'd go in free agency. To be
Yep.
honest, it's a win now team. We heard they were interested in a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster last year. Maybe they add somebody like that. I know we wouldn't add Juju Smith-Schuster to our team, but maybe the Chiefs like Juju. I don't know. 31 Cincinnati Bengals. This is not where they will be picking. By the way, they will be picking at 32.
32. Bingo.
But 31 Cincinnati Bengals, again, a relatively complete roster outside of probably offensive tackle is where they could use some help. But again, as we kind of talked about for Miami, there's not a whole lot of offensive line pieces that we think are worthy of this pick or present a high ceiling to the guys that they already currently have in house. So what direction do we want to go here?
Yeah, and I know I've talked to some people on Twitter that do follow the Bengals, and a big need of theirs that I've constantly seen, aside from the offensive line positions, is actually at 3 tech, getting another interior pass rusher to really benefit what has been a surprising defense. Again, from the secondary perspective, you're pretty much set there, obviously with Jesse Bates and Chidobe Awuzie in particular patrolling that back end. Adding a 3 tech with versatility that could play edge in spurts in DeMarvin Leal, I do think would be the best pick here. Again, when you're talking about DeMarvin Leal, he's a super athlete, played edge for Texas A&M. I do think his ideal position would be 3 tech in the NFL, but just getting a guy that can play both spots and has versatility and can add that type of dynamic ability on your front while complementing your back end ultimately would be the pick here. Again, is he a project? Sure. Do you think he's going to step in right away and be an impact level starter? Maybe not. But again, you're Cincinnati. You saw what this young offense and ultimately young secondary was able to help you do this year. Getting another young piece to develop in Leo would ultimately be a very good selection. And if he hits, I mean, this is going to be a team that we talk about being a perennial threat for the foreseeable future. So absolutely love Leo getting him at 31. This is a guy that was talked about as a potential top 10 pick going into the year.
Yep. I think the Lions are sprinting to the podium right now because they got a number one receiver on the board.
Yeah.
And they obviously were not going to take a receiver at 2. There's no reason to. You can get receivers later in the draft. If they wanted to trade up for this player, I suppose they could do it. But I do think the NFL is going to be a little lower on Drake London than the fantasy community is. And Drake London, before he got injured, was very, very, very productive, averaging like 11 catches per game. He was the USC offense. Everybody loves Drake London. Analytics, film people, like he's a great prospect. I don't think he should make it to this point in the draft. I think he should go before Jahan Dotson. I think he should go before some of the other wide receivers that we had go ahead of him. But Drake London, if he's on the board for the Lions, they just got a number one receiver at 32.
I mean, this is Mike Evans, in my opinion. Maybe even with a little bit more of a dynamic athleticism. Obviously, Evans is a phenomenal athlete, but London is basically a reincarnated Evans as to what we saw, obviously, with Evans and Johnny Manziel creating fireworks back in 2014. But when you're talking about Drake London, I mean, this is a guy that had nearly 1,100 yards in 8 games this year. Played college basketball. So if you're even questioning the athleticism, I mean, that should tell you all you need to hear.
I believe this was the first year, too, that he didn't play basketball, was it not?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, this is a guy that's 6'5" with a 40-inch type of leap that should run in the 4.4s. I mean, this is your dynamic athlete. Checks all the analytical boxes in terms of his production, in terms of his breakout age, analytical darling, and a guy that genuinely produced. So, again, if it was up to me, this would be more of a fringe top 15, 20 pick as opposed to the 32nd pick off the board. But again, maybe the teams are wary about the injury. Maybe the teams aren't really completely sold on him from a separation standpoint. But if you're the Lions, getting that number one alpha threat at your X receiver position is ultimately going to be a home run here in developing your next quarterback, assuming you draft them in 2023. So absolutely love London. 32. We'll kind of give you a little overview as to exactly how the draft went. You guys would know if you made it this far in the video. Leave a like, by the way, if you have. But yeah, you guys can kind of see that. We'll scroll by. If you guys have any questions, any comments, feel free to leave them down below. But yeah, any closing thoughts, Corey, or should we wrap this up?
All right, so that is the end of the mock draft. Again, if you guys made it to this point in the video, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Who do you want your team to draft, for example, is something that you could comment down below. Follow along if you guys are new to the channel. If this is like the first video you've ever seen of ours, we're typically a fantasy football channel. So if you guys play fantasy football, dynasty, all that stuff, check out recent videos that we've posted. Some of these prospects we did entire videos on, mainly the fantasy ones. So peace out, guys. We'll talk to you soon.